Today on MuscleCar, it's Mustang Mania. Tommy and Rick do some exhausting work on our Fox body. Flashback goes into the history of the Mustang and just what is the difference between cast and forged wheels.
Hey y'all, welcome to MuscleCar. We've been pretty busy on our Fox body Mustang, Project Dark Horse. Last go around, we dropped in this 331 stroker into it and upgraded with an aftermarket K-member and brakes.
Well, we also hung the posi rear end here that Tommy rebuilt. After that, we stabbed in our T5 5-speed transmission and kept it from falling out the bottom using a G-Force crossmember from Summit. Now, this thing is designed to accommodate future exhaust upgrades, and in keeping with our low buck theme, it only ran us about 150 bucks.
We're going to keep moving on this thing, starting with the intake. Edelbrock sent us their Victor Jr. manifold. This thing's designed to make power in the mid to high RPM range, so it'll complement those 410 gears we got out back, plus look good when we pop the hood. This Loctite gray gasket maker should give our intake a nice seal. I'll use some ARP bolts to button it up nice and tight, torque them to spec, and drop on our Edelbrock 4-barrel.
Our Fox body is not about the latest high-tech gadgets. We want to run parts that we know are going to work. So we decided to go with OEM type parts because this system, what's been cooling Fox body Mustangs for over 30 years. So we placed an order for everything from the radiator to the gaskets and even the thermostat from rockauto.com. A little more Loctite to ensure the water ports are sealed, and on goes the water pump. After that, I'll run on the balancer with an impact. Bolt on the crank pulley, and then the water pump pulley. And for the charging system, we did away with the factory externally regulated system and went with this GM style, one wire internally regulated. It's a whole lot easier to install, and we don't have to try to figure out the factory wiring. We wanted the alternator to match the theme of the car. So we talked to Tough Stuff, and they sent us this nice black and chrome unit. Well, now it's time to measure for the belt, and there's a really easy way to do that using the old 6-cylinder one. All you have to do is wrap it around the pulleys, overlap it a little bit, draw it up tight, mark it, and then just measure the overall length to your mark. That'll tell you the length of your belt. We'll install the thermostat and housing and the bypass hose. Then slip in the radiator, followed by the coolant hoses.
Next, we're going to install a set of these Summit long tube headers. They're mandrel bent for better flow, which means more power, and they're made of a heavy 18-gauge steel. And at a price tag at a little over 100 bucks, don't get much better than that. These headers also come with all the goodies you need to install them, including the gaskets and bolts. With Dark Horse being a late model, running a set of catalytic converters is mandatory. From the get-go, we said we wanted this car to pass a sniff test. When installing a set of converters, you need to get it as close as possible to the heads. On ours, we're going to cut the header flange off to move it forward about 6 or 8 inches. We're going to cut off a couple inches of the inlet of the converter. Trim down my header collector as short as possible. Then weld the two together. Leaving the flange loose on the header allows me to wiggle the converter around to give me some clearance, and then I'll just tack it in place. And there you go, one catalytic converter.
Still ahead, a budget-minded way to shorten your drive shaft. Youch! And everything you ever wanted to know about Ford's prized pony cars.
We've got most of the exhaust hung on Dark Horse. We've got the headers, the catalytic converters, and the lead pipes here already in place. Now we want this thing to sound aggressive on the street, because like I've said before, the show's called MuscleCar, not Weenie Car. And these Flowmaster mufflers should do the trick. Now we're using the original 40 series design because they're an aggressive street and strip muffler. Plus they'll make our little pony sound like a real beast. Now remember, before you finish welding anything, you got to make sure you got clearance all the way around. And one important thing is the drive shaft. So you don't want the drive shaft moving around as the suspension compresses and smash your exhaust. Beyond the drive shaft, you also want to be aware of anything else, especially when you're working on a car that already has lines that you're going to be reusing. Make sure you have enough clearance between your fuel lines and your exhaust, because this stuff does get hot. And we're not getting too fancy on the tail end of our exhaust here. We're just going to run a couple dumps, kind of aim them out the sides a little bit so the droning doesn't get too bad. Now I can mark it, pull it off, weld it up. I'll line my marks back up and tack it together. Then burn it in. That's about it. Now I can bolt the collector back on. It helps to have something like a screw jack to hold the tubes up. I'll mount a set of universal hangers to keep the back end in place. And there you go. Now she can exhale with no restrictions.
You guys may remember the K-member we installed into our Mustang had the option of moving the engine back for better weight distribution. So that's what we went with. Well, doing that caused the drive shaft to be a little bit too long. I've got a cheap and easy way to shorten it.
Build on a budget. MuscleCar projects that save you time and money.
Now we've already determined that we needed to shorten the drive shaft right at 1 inch. Your first cut needs to be on the tube side of this welded joint. Using a roll of tape that's 1 inch in width, this gives you your other cut. If you keep it pulled tight, not too far forward, you can see how it bunches up. It'll actually show you mark you a good true cut. Before you get too cut happy, draw a line from the yoke onto the tube. What this does is give you a reference point to match them back up. Do is run the edge of the blade right across the edge of the tape. Make sure that you've cut all the way through the tube, all the way around. That was pretty easy. See, you can do this at home. I like to file this with a little bit of a taper. That'll help the yoke start. All right, now I want to grind out a small groove in this joint to ensure a strong weld. Then I'll clean the welding surface, because welding on top of rust just doesn't cut it. Now before you get too trigger happy and weld this thing all the way up, put a few tacks equally spaced to keep this thing from pulling as you weld it up. Once you get it tacked, you can burn it together. Try to keep each welding pass the same as the other. This will help keep it balanced. What do you think? Think it hold? Sweet.
On the way, the history of the Mustang. Learn all about an American icon. Plus, all aluminum wheels aren't created equal. Stick around. Today's flashback, the history of the Ford Mustang.
Mustang, the original. Mustang, 3 new ways to answer the call of Mustang.
It's hard to imagine the car world without it. Ever since it hit the ground in 1964, the Stampede hasn't let up. And the Mustang of today still captures the style, the power, and the spirit of the pony car that kicked it all off 45 years ago.
When the Mustang debuted on April 17, 1964, more than 22,000 were sold that day. By the end of the second year, more than 1 million were on the road. But the Mustang may have never left the stable without the vision of one man.
In 1962, Ford was still fresh off the Edsel disaster. Ford VP Lee Iacocca saw a way to revive the Blue Oval brand with his total performance concept.
It first took shape in the Mustang 1, a futuristic-looking mid-engine 2-seater roadster, but Iacocca knew it was too impractical and he'd never get it approved for production.
So he pushed for a low-priced sports car, small and fun to drive, but roomy enough for 3 of your friends. To keep down costs, it had to be designed on the same frame as the Falcon and reach showrooms in less than 18 months.
The designers went back to the drawing board and came up with something a lot like the classic Mustang we know today. With some more refinements, it was unveiled at the New York World's Fair, and the country went wild.
It could be any car you wanted it to be, a sleek coupe, sporty ragtop, or killer fastback. You could get a six-banger or a high-powered V8. Bucket seats, a 4 on the floor, and a laundry list of options, all with a price tag starting at just $2,400.
The first GTs came late in '65 and included things like fog lights, rally pack gauges, and 271 horses under the hood.
The man, Carroll Shelby, engineer, race driver. The car, the Shelby Mustang GT.
Ford teamed up with Shelby all through the 60s to create a limited edition series of race-ready Mustangs. The GT350 was a two-seater sporting racing stripes and horsepower ramped up to over 300.
'67 was a turning point, the year it got its first big block. Shelby dropped in a 428 that made over 400 horse, known as a GT500. Regular Mustangs got a 390 V8 making 320 horse to help compete against the brand new Camaro.
The original Mustang. It opened up a whole new way to swing.
Now get ready to swing again. Mustang 69.
The little pony got bigger and badder as the 60s came to a close. Trans Am Racing spawned the Boss 302 and the Boss 429. It was so big they had to modify the suspension.
The Mustang muscled its way into the '70s, but gradually the oil crisis and EPA regulations took their toll on performance. In '74, it was stripped down to an economy gas sipper called the Mustang II, and sport versions had more bark than bite.
5 years later, the Mustang was resurrected with a fresh look on Ford's new Fox body, ushering in a new era of performance. The GT package returned in '82, and the '83 models got a 5-liter engine with 175 horses, the most since the '71 Boss 351.
For the fourth generation, Ford brought back the classic styling cues of the original, like side scoops, 3-element taillights, and the signature long hood and short deck.
When the pony car turned 40, it was time for another revamp. And this time, Ford really went retro, bringing all the elements of the original design into the 21st century. It was an instant hit with the public, reigniting muscle car fever and spurring Chevy and Dodge to play catch-up.
Not to be outdone, Ford unleashed a bold new version for 2010, one that added a more aggressive stance to that iconic style. For almost half a century, the Mustang has been proven that it's one wild horse that won't be broken.
Still ahead, they may both be shiny, but the similarities end there. You're watching MuscleCar. For a DVD copy of this episode, just go to PowerBlockTV.com and order your copy for just $5.95 plus shipping and handling. Start your own MuscleCar collection, delivered right to your door from the PowerBlock.
Well, Dark Horse here has been looking pretty thirsty, so I've been working on bending in some fuel lines to help feed the fire. I'm going with 3/8 stainless steel just to make sure that there's no restriction in the new line. And then if we ever want to upgrade the factory 5/16 line, these will already be in place.
Since we plugged in that T5 transmission, those two pedals aren't going to cut it anymore. So we had to install a clutch pedal assembly, which we picked up from a local salvage yard for about 20 bucks. The next thing we need to do is install the shifter. We decided to go with the Hirsch Pro Billet model because it's got shorter throws for quicker shifts, plus it's tailor fit to fit our Mustang. So installing it should be a breeze. Not only does it look nice, but it's also a piece of insurance that keeps you from missing gears and redlining your motor. Sir, to light the fire on Dark Horse, we decided to go with the Petronix Flamethrower Distributor. It's got a special module and coil combo to keep from breaking down in the higher RPM level. This is a GM style distributor, which we decided to go with because of its simple design. It only has a single wire hookup. Easy as pie. We're also going to plug in a set of flamethrower wires, and that should just about do it. We've got a few loose ends we've got to tie up, like the starter, some wiring, and adding some fluids before we're ready to hit the road. But we still got a good ways to go before we can do a big smoky burnout.
Now everybody knows that bolting on a set of custom wheels will dramatically improve the look of your ride, but not all aluminum wheels were created equal. Now these two may look stylish, but when it comes down to strength, there's no comparison. Now this wheel is cast in one piece from molten aluminum. It's more affordable, but it's not the strongest or the lightest way to make a performance wheel. It requires a lot of material in the rim area, the spokes, and the center, making it heavier. Now even with that, under aggressive loads, the more brittle casting can fail, just like the center here that broke out. The crystallized random grain is porous and not near as dense or strong as it needed to be. The other option, a forged multi-piece wheel, like this one from Weld Racing. Its strength comes from extreme compression during the forging process, ensuring the grain is consistent. Now this is Weld's new lightweight RTS race wheel, which has 3 forged components: an outer rim, inner rim, and a center, which are all welded together, and that's always stronger than a wheel that's been bolted together. Now another nice thing about this design is that Weld in Kansas City, well, they can change the design of the spokes or the rim individually, and that can give you more room for things like oversized calipers or rotors. Now bottom line is that when it comes to aluminum wheels, they may look similar, but there's a huge difference between cast one-piece and forged multi-piece wheels. If you have any questions about anything you saw on the show today, you can check it all out at PowerBlockTV.com. Well, for this week, we're out of time, so until next time, we're out of here.